Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 313 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is breathing. Our quote of the day comes to us from George Steinbrenner. Winning is the most important thing in my life after breathing. Breathing first, winning next. Don't forget to grab yourself a copy of The Positivity Tribe wherever books are sold. I had an absolute blast speaking with today's guest. After hearing him on Joe Rogan's podcast, as well as Impact Theory, I knew that I had to get James Nestor on the show. The knowledge he has on the topic of breathing is absolutely fascinating. He also touches upon meditation and how the way we breathe can also impact both our sleep as well as the efficiency of our sleep. I hope you enjoy today's episode. James, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me.
I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
I will try.
That's all we can do is try. The number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story or perhaps a challenging time personally or professionally where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
I think my whole life is a no-quit story. So I got into journalism very late in life. And I had a corporate job. I guess you could call me successful. I had a staff and all that, but my true love was writing. And I never saw a means to do that would allow me to do this and survive financially or otherwise. But I kept chipping away at it. So on weekends and on evenings, I would just work on magazine stories for nothing more than I just absolutely loved the process. And it wasn't until about 6 or 7 years of doing that on my weekends and nights that I was able to finally break away and to become a writer full time. So there were many ups and downs in this process, mostly downs, but I just kept at it because it was something I absolutely loved to do. And here I am now talking to you. So that's great.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing that and your candor. And for our listeners, if you didn't catch, it was 6 or 7 years. So for so many of us out here that see these quote unquote overnight success, I think that really shows that if it's something you want to do, and you touched upon having a regular job and doing it on the weekends. So for anybody that's listening, 6 or 7 years, do it on the weekends. Don't give up. So kudos to you for doing that. And I have to tell you, and this we record over video but only release on audio, and your new book is fascinating. And as a former 2 college sport athlete and a college coach, I have to ask you, where were you about 20 years ago? Because I think your book probably could help me in many different ways. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of shortly touching on what led you to actually writing this book.
Well, 20 years ago, I was working a corporate job. I was eating the right foods. At least I thought they were the right foods. I was exercising all the time. I was sleeping my super 8 hours, but I was continuing to get sick every year. It's just, I'd always be the first person to get the flu. I'd always be the last person to get a cold. This just went on, and I just thought that this was a normal part of modern living. And until I would say about a decade ago, when I started getting much more clued into the ways in which I was breathing, specifically how dysfunctional my breathing was at night. I was a mouth breather. I had been a mouth breather at night for as long as I can remember. When I was working out, I was breathing through my mouth. I was starting to wheeze a lot. I was getting bronchitis. I was getting pneumonia. And my doctor just said, it's fine. You're getting old. This is what old age is about. But I didn't really go for that. So that's really what led me into wanting to understand how breath, and specifically how we breathe, affects our health and happiness and longevity.
So I did some research on you, not only reading the book, but I've seen you on a bunch of podcasts. And I have to say, listening to you talk about this is just eye-opening. So first question I have to ask is, what's the difference between a mouth breather and a nose breather, and the importance? Because clearly I've been breathing the wrong way for 42 years.
Yeah, you and much of the population. So the percentages vary, but something like 25 to 50% of the population habitually breathes through its mouth. And this is so common now that we think it's normal. You can go on YouTube and you see kids breathing through their mouths all the time, breathing through their mouths and snoring when they're sleeping. People think this is super cute, but it's not. The breath we take through our mouth is so different from the breath we take through our nose. And specifically, our nose will humidify, it will filter air, it will condition it, it will pressurize it, so that by the time that air gets to us, it's much more purified than it was before. If you're breathing through your mouth and you live in a city, you are exposing your lungs to everything in that environment: pollution, pollens, I mean, you name it, viruses and more. So our noses are our first line of defense. And the fact that we become the only species in the animal kingdom, really, to habitually breathe through its mouth, I think is pretty tragic.
So from a sports perspective, and again, going back to my question about playing sports and coaching sports in college, what is the huge difference in regards to performance as far as breathing through your nose versus your mouth?
Well, when you're breathing through your mouth, you tend to overbreathe. And a lot of people think that when we're getting more oxygen into our lungs more often, we are allowing our body to have more energy and more fuel. But the exact opposite is happening. If you don't believe me, you can just try it for about 20 breaths. Take really heavy breaths, right? So your head is going to get, you're going to feel lightness in your head, and you might even feel tingling or numbness in your fingers. So that's from oxygen not getting to those areas. So when we overbreathe, we cause vasoconstriction throughout our body, which makes circulation to areas throughout our body much harder to get there. Those red blood cells carrying that oxygen. So this is something that I was amazed that we've known about this for 120 years. But still, you go into any gym, you look around at any street of people jogging or working out, and they're just thinking they're getting more oxygen, but they're actually doing the opposite.
So from an athletic perspective, many of our listeners are into sports and maybe athletes or coaches themselves. Is there one or two things that, and I know maybe a difficult question, but I don't want to say a quick fix because it's not a quick fix, but is there one or two things that people can begin doing immediately that it's going to have a positive impact, and then if you continually do it, it's going to have a significant impact?
Absolutely. Breathe through your nose all the time. So, and breathe within your metabolic needs. So that's really hard to do because you don't know exactly how much you need to breathe or how little you need to breathe, but chances are you're breathing way too much. And the nose helps naturally gauge this, because when you breathe through your nose, as opposed to breathing through your mouth, you're going to feel that there's a lot more resistance in your nose. That's a good thing. Coming in, there is a vacuum. Coming out, there's positive pressure. That resistance, and by slowing down the air, allows us to extract way more oxygen breathing through our nose than through our mouth. So when you're breathing through the nose also, your heart rate is going to be lower. Sometimes significantly lower, maybe 20 beats a minute lower breathing through your nose. That means you are running much more efficiently. You are using less energy to accomplish more. Now, where this gets sticky is a lot of people who have been training to breathe through their mouths for decades are going to find it's a complete pain in the butt to switch through the nose. And sometimes this takes weeks. Sometimes it takes months to acclimate, but the science is very clear. There's so many studies showing that once you make the switch, there's a good chance your performance is going to go up, your recovery time is going to go down, you're going to feel a lot better, and you're going to function much more efficiently, which is so important throughout the day.
That's one of our key words is efficiently, and we coach efficiency in regards to a lot of the college sports teams that we work with, but also in the business world. And you touched on it a couple of times. And I think that's one of the things that I took from not only this book, but some of the interviews I've seen you do, is in regards to how efficiently you are doing something. It's not about this ultimate goal or success. It's being the best version of yourself with breathing. So you talk about sleep apnea and snoring. So Would you say, I'm just curious, all these CPAP machines, if people knew how to breathe properly, would you say a significant amount of the need to use a CPAP machine at night would diminish?
So I just want to pipe in about the athleticism and efficiency. I've been working with Brian McKenzie. He's a top trainer to Olympians, to ultra marathoners, to NBA. So, I mean, you can go down the list. And he's saying now that VO2 max in many ways is BS.
Really?
It's about the efficiency of using that oxygen in your body. It's not about cramming as much air into your body at all times, but how you use that oxygen. So he's just developing this protocol right now. He's working with several athletes on this. So I can't speak to the particulars. He could answer that, but it just shows that efficiency working out is just as important as efficiency when you're working in your day job. Why would you want to expend extra energy doing something? That's a bad way to really excel in performance. So about CPAPs have been absolute lifesavers for people because so much of the population is struggling with sleep apnea. One percentage by Harvard said 20% of the population has sleep apnea. I've heard it can be even higher than that. So CPAPs are fantastic. The problem is CPAPs do nothing for the core problem. You have to keep using the CPAP night in or night out, or you're going to choke on yourself throughout the night. So there's two different things going on here. Do you want to fix the core problem of your airway obstruction, or do you just constantly want to use a Band-Aid? Do you want to put on this terrestrial scuba mask every single night of your life? It's a tough decision for people, but there are alternatives to just using a CPAP, and that's what so many sleep surgeons are helping people with right now.
Is it actual surgery that does it, or are there other things that you can do in addition to it?
There's various things. It really depends what your problem is and where your problem is. So sleep apnea can occur in 3 different areas in the airway. So depending on where it's occurring is going to show you what therapy would work best for you. So it's, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a breathing therapist. I can't prescribe some blanket therapy for everyone to do. I can say, however, having worked with doctors and therapists and experts in this field, that for people with mild snoring, with mild sleep apnea, even into the moderate area, closing your mouth at night really seems to help. It helped tremendously with me, and I'm getting literally hundreds of emails from people saying, I've been snoring for 30 years. I have to sleep in a different room. My wife hates me. I wore this little piece of tape to keep my mouth shut at night. I no longer snore. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Which brings up a larger question is, why has this stuff been so understudied for so long? But that's a whole other can of worms.
So it's so fascinating that you talk about the core problem versus going ahead and working on it. And I think it's just fascinating because there's so many different studies. But to your point, it just makes me think, why do people not look at the actual problem as opposed to your point, putting a Band-Aid on it? Because the reality is, if your arm is bleeding and it continually bleeds, you have to keep putting the Band-Aid on, but unless you fix it, and once you fix it, my thought process is you don't need the Band-Aid anymore, and you can go ahead and move on with your life. And I want to ask you in regards to sleeping. There's obviously a ton of studies, and my listeners know that I talk about morning routines and evening routines. But in regards to the optimal amount of sleep, I would assume, and I'm curious to get your perspective, is if you are sleeping more efficiently, then you would need less sleep than if you're not an efficient sleeper. Maybe you would need 8, 9, 10 hours. Is there science and studies behind that as well?
Yes and no. And this is where it gets pretty sticky as well. Matthew Walker, who wrote an amazing book called Why We Sleep, had shown that you basically need upwards of 7 to 8 hours. And I'm not a sleep expert. This is what he was saying. If you're truly going to remove all that junk from your brain, if you're going to reset yourself, that's what you need. But it is ironic that some people who are saying, I'm getting 9 hours of sleep, 10 hours of sleep, whatever, they're not looking at the quality of sleep. So if you are struggling to breathe throughout the night, every hour of every night that you're sleeping, it doesn't matter if you're sleeping 12 hours or 13 hours. you're injuring your body. So it's really two things you have to address: quality of sleep and the amount of time. And Matthew Walker says you definitely need to have a certain prescribed amount of time that you're sleeping, or your body is never going to catch up. I don't feel comfortable speaking to the particulars of that, but I'd suggest people check out his book, which is just awesome.
I'm glad you touched on that because it's something that I've studied a lot, not only with this show, but with my company, is when people talk about needing a certain amount of time. And I'm not a doctor myself, so I can't say what the rule is, but I've thought that it's a blanket statement to say that you need X amount of sleep. Because to your point, if you're sleeping for 9 hours, but you're not sleeping efficiently and you're waking up every 11 minutes, yes, it's technically a total of 9 hours, but maybe it's only 2 hours of efficient sleep. So the flip side is if somebody were to sleep only 5.5 hours total, but they got 80% of that sleep was efficient and it was recovery. I always find it interesting because it's one of those catch-22s. Does a chicken come before the egg? And is it the time versus the quality? And is there a mix between the two of them?
Well, you can look at float tanks, and people who go into float tanks can sleep 4 hours. And there's been a lot of science that's saying that intense sleep in a float tank is equivalent to 8 hours of sleep. So that's an interesting thing. Again, I think this field is a bit murky, but the way that I look at it is, imagine working, right? For instance, today, I have about 4 hours of concentrated focus work I need to do for an upcoming presentation. I can either turn off my phone, turn off my email, and just bust that out, or I can do exactly what I've done today, is unfortunately have my email on, and now that 4 hours of work is going to take me probably 10 hours because there's so much noise coming in because I'm not working efficiently. And the key with some elements of sleeping, and certainly with work, is to find ways of working the most efficiently. I think that most jobs can be done in probably about 3 hours if you cut out all the crap instead of 8 hours. At least that was my experience in the corporate world for about 15, 20 years. I kept thinking, I was like, God, if people just let me alone, I could bust all of this out at a better quality in 2.5 hours. But that's just not the reality of many workplaces.
It's interesting that you touch on that because I speak at different companies, and there are so many studies of how often people get interrupted. And the average I've seen in different reports is, upwards of one time every 3 minutes. But then the other perspective of it is I've seen reports that say it takes about 15 to 23 minutes of time to get back into that flow state. So I think, to your point, I believe it's probably that 3 to 4 hour window where if you time block, if you put your phone on airplane mode, you put a sign on your door, you put your phone on your office phone, and then you go ahead and do it. And I also know a bunch of people that set their emails up where they will literally have an automatic response saying, I will check my email at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. If this is an emergency, call here. And I remember the first time I heard that, I thought it was absolutely insane. And I would say there's no way you could do it. But then when you take it a step further, to your point, it's about being efficient. And the thing that I always joke about when I speak on stage is if somebody's house was on fire, you're not going to send them an email. Dear James, if you don't mind, the house is on fire, please call the fire department. You're going to call the main number and call again. So when you think about it, is if you take that time and eliminate the distractions, your ability to be so much more efficient increases by 10, I would assume.
This was the only way I could write this book. So this book was a complete pain in the butt. It took me years. There's 500 scientific references. I interviewed probably 60 different doctors for it. And I noticed that day in, day out, I just wasn't making the progress I needed to make. So I did that thing. I said, listen, I'm checking email at 9 a.m. and I'm checking email at 4 p.m. And that's it. And if you ever need me, here's my phone number. I didn't get one call over a year and a half of extremely focused writing. Not one call, not even from my agent. She's like, it can wait. It can wait till he's checking email. So it just shows you this urgency, quote unquote urgency. A lot of it isn't really urgent. It's just people being impatient. And if you get them to understand that you're being more productive in this one mode of working, they'll tend to work around that. And I'll be honest, I haven't been doing this the last 6 months. Things have been totally insane. I cannot wait till I have an excuse to log off my email for 6 hours at a time, because I feel such a peace come over me where I can really focus on the real work.
I think that's so powerful. And to your point, I've had the opportunity and the fortune of interviewing some incredible authors, and so many of them have shared very similar ideas. Some have gone to the extent of physically going away somewhere and only having an actual laptop that doesn't have internet and access to it, not having a phone. But then other people do similar things to you where they say, look, I'm going to write every day from, let's say, 10 a.m. to 12. I'm going to have lunch for an hour, and then I'm going to write for 2 more hours. And it doesn't seem like a huge number on a day, but if you compound that over 2 days, over 3 days, over 5 days. But going back to what you said, is it's about eliminating those distractions. It's about being more efficient, more effective. Wanted to take a step back for a second in regards to a personal question for high school or college sports teams. Is there one thing, or is there one maybe strategy or concept that you'd be able to give different teams where they could try something for a couple minutes each day, and really, if you consistently do that, you'll see a positive impact over time?
What coaches did about 50 years ago is they would have runners fill up their mouths with water and run around the track, and then they would have to spit out the same amount of water in a cup. And this trained them to only nasal breathe. I've heard that they also did it with marbles. You had to cruise around with marbles in your mouth. Don't go out and do this, people. Water's probably fine. Marbles is like a really bad idea. But this stuff has been around for a long time, and it goes back to nasal breathing, because nasal breathing is efficient. I mean, that is where you're going to get 20% more oxygen breathing through your nose than equivalent breaths through the mouth. If you think that's not going to make a difference throughout the day, and if you think that's not going to make a difference, especially when you're working out, you're crazy. And again, the science has been very clear about this, and yet so much of training has ignored the how of breathing. They're just like, breathe however you want. I don't care, just work out harder. And I'm seeing that that's really starting to change in some big ways, especially with trainers who had contacted me, who have said, I've been trying to tell people this for years and years. Everyone thought I was crazy to have people run around with tape over their mouths. And now what do you see? There's a bunch of people with tape over their mouths. It's easy now because you can wear a mask. You don't look like a total freak if you want to do this. But, by any means, go for it. And again, these results are not going to be instantaneous. Oftentimes your performance is going to drop precipitously. Sometimes by like 30 or 40%, there's going to be a drop. But if you stick with it, it's not going to only come back up. It's going to exceed what you were able to do before.
So I have to ask this question based on our current environment with the pandemic and everybody in many places throughout the United States being forced, and also throughout the world, to wear masks. Is there a additional suggestion or a asterisk or side note in regards to nose breathing while wearing these masks? In some places you have to put them above your nose. So I'm curious, because I've found myself struggling sometimes at the gym, and it's not that I've actually gotten in better shape during this pandemic just because I've been working out more, but it's so difficult to breathe with the mask on.
Yeah, I agree. From the studies that I've seen, there's no oxygen deficiency in your body from wearing a mask. There are different masks, right? And there are some are much more porous, some aren't, but anyone can test this. So if you get a pulse oximeter, which most people have nowadays, they're like $20 on Amazon, you can see your oxygen stats as you're breathing through the mask. And there is a very good chance what you're going to see is your oxygen is not changing. That need to breathe is not dictated by oxygen. It's dictated by an increase of CO2, of carbon dioxide. So when people are walking around saying, there's no way I can wear a mask, I'm not getting enough oxygen, I can feel it throughout my body's getting warmer, that's CO2 rising. And there are many benefits to having a bit more CO2 in your body if you're a healthy person. Not if you're emphysemic, okay, not if you have COVID, but if you're a healthy person, CO2 creates more vasodilation, which allows more red blood cells to get through more areas throughout your body and feed all those hungry cells in your muscles and tissues and organs. So I'm not saying it's easy to breathe through your nose in a mask, but you have to do it. And do not switch to mouth breathing in a mask because, again, the nose is the first line of defense. Masks are designed to stop you from spreading viruses, right? They aren't designed to stop viruses from getting into you. That's what the nose does. So wear your mask, breathe through your nose.
I love it. So on Joe Rogan's podcast, you shared how you feel that breathing should be considered along with diet and exercise as a pillar of health. I just want to ask if you wouldn't mind just quickly touching on that because I thought it was very interesting.
Well, what we know now is that no matter what you're eating, whether you're paleo or keto or vegan or pescatarian, whatever, and no matter how much you're sleeping or how much you're working out, none of this matters unless you've got your breathing in check. And you can see this by looking at these totally ripped muscle men, these weightlifters down on Venice Beach here in California. They're all over the place. You'd think these people are the pinnacle of health. These people die of heart issues all the time. And there's a reason why they crane their necks out like this, because they can't breathe. There's also a reason why they're, by and large, almost all of them suffer from sleep apnea because their airways are obstructed. So you have to be looking at how you're breathing and the ease through which you're taking in air when you're thinking about health. And it's something that a lot of people haven't been doing, which is so strange. We breathe 20 to 25,000 times a day. And if we're doing that improperly, it's going to have downstream effects on your health.
Wow, that's fascinating. Curious question I have is, by your terms, what's the difference between breathing and meditating?
At the beginning, I don't find that there's any difference. This is just my opinion here. If you look at people when they first start meditating, what is the thing you're asked to do? Why don't you sit down and focus on your breath? Why don't you sit down in this dark room and stare at Buddha? What are you doing when you're meditating? You are slowing your breathing, okay, to more closely in line with your metabolic needs. I know that more experienced meditators, there's so many benefits to that. So you can grow more gray matter, you can take over emotional centers of the brain. I get all that. But for most of us at the beginning, the benefits of meditation are tied to the ways in which you breathe. And I wish someone would do this study where they would take two groups of people and they would have one of them sit in the dark room, stare at the Buddha, meditate and breathe a certain way. Then they take the other group and just have them breathe as though they were meditating in that dark room. And from what I've seen, they would have the same benefits.
So for our listeners, you've just received some information about a study, so go ahead and take that into consideration. So I have to ask you, James, what's the best way for our listeners to follow you or connect with you? But also, where can they get your book? I assume it's anywhere that books are sold?
Yeah, it's all anywhere that books are sold, which is basically what like Amazon nowadays in a pandemic. But find your independent bookstore. These people need your help. You can go to my website. It's at mrjamesnestor.com. You can put a /breath there. There are resources there of how to breathe. There are expert interviews with doctors at Harvard, and there are more than 500 different scientific studies with videos and x-rays and all that stuff, including links on where to buy the book.
And are you active on social media as well?
I'm trying to be more active on social media, but I just heard yesterday that someone has scammed my account and is now writing people and claiming they're me and sending flirty messages to people and trying to con them out of money. So if there's any reason to yank myself off social media, I think now is the time to do it. But having said all that, I'm on Instagram and I'm just posting stuff about breathing and science, and no puppy dog pictures or pictures of my food, I promise.
All right, I was about to ask if you're posting what you have for lunch and dinner, because I'm curious about that.
I'm not, man. I mean, I could tell you, it'd bore you to tears.
And then last question I have for you is the same one I ask every guest, is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
I think ambition is the last refuge of failure. And what I mean by that is it's easy to sit around and think you're going to do something, to hem and haw, to plan stuff. It's another thing entirely to actually sit down and do that thing. So what I've found in life, this is so cliched, but it's true, is ideas are cheap. Ideas are easy. The real work comes in actually making the idea and bringing it to fruition. So, Woody Allen said 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And I've found that that is entirely true.
I love that. I have to thank you, James. I thought this was amazing. I definitely have been breathing the wrong way for 42 years, and I feel like I just got an MBA in breathing. And for our listeners out there, definitely check out James's book. He's been on a bunch of shows. It's absolutely fascinating, and I just can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 313. James absolutely crushed it today, and I'm so glad that we were able to get him on our show. I love how he touched upon the efficiency of how we breathe, but also how it impacts so many other areas of our lives. So my challenge to you today is to think about the way in which you breathe. Are you a nose breather or a mouth breather? Challenge yourself to try and become a better breather today, a more efficient breather. And if you can, James and his work has shown how it can and will have significant benefits in your life. And remember, we rise by lifting others up.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.